All right, so I think the first thing we'll do today is go over building out sort of like a generic tooltip where you can have a single page that you're going to provide information to display a tooltip throughout your project to give the user additional information about whatever it is that they're putting their mouse over. And as usual with this kind of thing, there are several ways to accomplish this. And so I'll go through a couple of the different methods. First one I'll go through is the one that we typically use when we're doing things. And it's more of a component-based methodology to it, which helps with, scaling that over time as your app grows. So I've got a brand new project here. I'm just going to start from scratch. I'll just drop a blank page on. We'll call this our home page. This is just going to be our main page. And then what I'm going to do is drop another blank page on, put that one over here. And this one's going to be our tooltip page. Tooltip page. And all this tooltip is going to have on it, we'll just put a div. And I'll also put a text box. And this text box is going to be, the tooltip that we're going to display in there. On the div, I'll do a little bit of styling. I'll just make a new class, tooltip container, and we'll add some properties. We'll go, actually, let's do, let's just do a border. So we'll do border, 1 pixel, solid, and we'll make it kind of like, maybe just like a gray color. Obviously, you would style this for however you want. I'll add some padding to it. And we'll go with I'll just do 20 pixels for now. I'll also go ahead and change this to div just to remove the extra margin on there. So it's just static inside of that. And then I think inside of this, I'll also do a border radius. So that we have maybe 8 pixels. And let's do one more thing, background color. Just do white on it. All right, so you might style that a little differently, right? I would probably add some things to this. But conceptually, what we're going to do is when the user enters their mouse or clicks on something on the home page, what I'm going to do is make it to where we open this page into a container on the home page, and we set a specific value based on what they put their mouse in or what they clicked on. And that will get you basically this generic reusable thing. And then we can add that to other pages and show you how to do it just about anywhere. So let's start on the home page. We'll build a couple of quick things here. I'll just do a div, and then I'll do a text box. And let's do a button. And maybe an image as well. So what I'm going to do is make it to where when you mouse into these different elements, we'll open the page into this floating container that will open this into it. And so when it's an image, I'll make the tooltip say image. When you mouse into the button, we'll make the tooltip say button. And when you mouse into the text box, we'll make it say text box. So we need to make another container on the outer page. And this one I'm going to call tooltip, or maybe floating tooltip. So this needs some style settings on it. So I'm going to go ahead and make a class for it. Basically, what we're going to do is make this be positioned inside of the window. And to do that, you want to use a style property called position, and you want it to be fixed. And then that'll move it around. That'll make it to where it's moves around outside of the context of all the other elements on the page. So let's do floating tooltip container, and we'll do position fixed. And to start, I think I'll put it top 0, so you can see it here. And then it moved up to here because it's top 0 now. And I'll go ahead and just put a left on it as well, but it doesn't, you don't actually have to do this because all of what we're going to do is part of the action that runs whenever you put your mouse into these. Part of that flow is going to reposition it based on where your cursor is on the page. And then we'll do like an offset. We'll get a little further into it as well. So let's go ahead and make a flow. Let's do it for the image to start. So on mouse center of this image, I want to do a series of things. So I'm going to do a new flow here. And you know what? I wonder if I shouldn't do this just a little bit differently, but it's okay. We'll do it like this and then we can talk about it. Typically what I'll do is a generic flow to start that takes variables in order to set the positions. And then that way I can just run that same thing every time. So maybe we should do it like that. So when we do the new flow on this mouse center, this is going to be, I'll just call it mouse enter image. And what we're going to do is a set variable into the root. And on that, we're going to say tooltip value. And in this case, I want the tooltip value to be image. And then what we'll do is set another variable. And actually, I'll just duplicate this. And this one we're going to do, actually, all we need to do, let's do one more thing. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go ahead and make my other action. So I'll do another flow for mouse enter button. And I'm going to paste that. And then I'm going to do mouse enter, oops, not click. You could do click, but it's okay. Mouse enter text. Okay. And we're going to paste that as well. And this needs to be changed to text. And this one needs to change to button. Okay, so now I have these flows that all they do is when you mouse into these different elements, I'm setting a variable into the root page that either the value of that variable is either text box, button, or image. So that's the start. Then what I'm going to do is have another flow called open tooltip. And inside of there, what we're going to do is do an open page into a container. And we're going to open the tooltip page, which is this one, into the floating tooltip container that's located inside of the home page. And then what we need to do is position that tooltip container, this floating tooltip container. We need to change its position to be the existing mouse cursor's position. So that way, when they mouse into it, it's going to basically open that page and move the page to be exactly where the cursor is that the user's mouse was at whenever they moved into there. So before I show you how that works, I want to show you in the preview. We open this up, and I'm going to open the debug here. If I go to console and I just do browform root dot underscore vars, this is sort of like how we get access to it. That one more time. I hadn't moved my mouse on the screen yet. So when you do that, it's actually tracking your mouse position. So you have these root variables accessible at any time. And you can see that because I move my mouse into the image, it says image in there. So like if I move my mouse onto the button and then do it again, well, I have to get out of there. And then, well, as soon as I move back down, I can't do it because when I move back down, I move over the image and then it changes it back to image. So, but you get the idea. It's showing me the mouse position, showing me that tooltip value. So what I'm going to do is use this mouse position X and Y in order to place that, that tooltip. So on here, we've opened the page into there. And then I'm going to use another action called set style property. I'm going to set the property of the floating tooltip. We're going to set the left property to come from a variable on the root page that's that window mouse position X. And then I'm going to duplicate that. Maybe we'll do I'll usually change these names like set style property left. And then this one would be set style property top. And here we'll use the Y position. Okay, so now when that executes, it's going to run, open the page, and move that thing around based on the cursor position that the user had when they did it. So the last step here is...
Don't forget to update the property name.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then also the button, you have that on click instead of mouse enter.
Yeah, that's perfect. I saw it earlier and I'm going to leave it. So that way we can do it like a click. The other thing we have to do too is when we do this, we need to nest now our open tooltip in here. Otherwise, it's not going to actually do any of that. It's not going to open the page. It's not going to reposition it. So now it's going to set that variable for what the value is. I want it to wait and then open the tooltip. That way the variable exists up there. So let's do that with the button. Open tooltip, we'll go wait. I'm sorry, the image, and then we'll go button. And this is going to be click button. We'll nest and open tooltip, and we're going to wait. And there's one more step, and that is on the tooltip. We need to get this variable value from the root, tooltip value, this one. And we need to use that to set the tooltip value in here. So the flow goes, user performs an action, they click the button or they mouse enter to one of these things. It sets the variable for what the value should be when they mouse enter or click on that thing. Then it opens the tooltip page. So on the tooltip page, in the page binding, I'm going to set an action that does a set element value. This one. And we're going to set the tooltip to come from that root page variable of tooltip value. Okay, so this concept of like passing variables back and forth between the root page and into other pages and things gets really powerful once you get used to using those things that way. It's like storing data temporarily just for that session or just while the user is performing the actions on that page. All right, I think that should get everything. So let's go back to the preview. And there we go, we're in image. So when I went to image, it did that. If I click the button, it did that. So something's up. I already know what's up. I forgot to do one thing. But you can see it's when I go there and I click the button, it's just not changing the position, right? So the thing that I forgot was that the position is expecting the number and then a PX at the end. If you don't put that PX at the end, it will not actually reposition it properly. So what I need to do is go back over here and onto the open tooltip. And here, instead of just grabbing that variable, what I'm going to do is a concatenate where the first value comes from that variable on the root page, window position X. And then I'm going to add a PX to the end. Now, this is just something that's specific to the way that the browser is going to interpret that data. So when I'm setting that left position, if I just put a number in there, it just ignores it. It treats it like 0. If I put the PX on the end, it's going to treat it correctly. And now what I'll do is actually just duplicate that one, change this to top, change this to Y, and we should be good there. Okay. So there we go. Now you can see it's like tracking when I come in and out of that image. And you can see it, I moved it to text, image, and it's just tracking my mouse wherever it's at. So if I come in and out of that text box, you can see it's doing it. If I click the button again, click the button again, right? So it's just going to move it. So you can kind of trigger this based on anything you want. It doesn't have to be mouse enter. It doesn't have to be click. It can literally be anything you want. So you might do like have a little question mark next to some piece of content on the page instead of like when they click the button, maybe there's a little question mark and they put their mouse over it and it positions it in there. So this is a way to do like a full-on generic, I'm moving this div around in the root page and opening the same tooltip box. But there are several other methods for doing something very similar. And before we dive into one of those methods, what I want to do is make another page where we display maybe a set of rows on the root And then when you mouse into the different rows, we take context from that data in the row and use that as part of the tooltip. Because that's something that I think a lot of people will do as well. So I'm going to do one more page here. We'll add a page over here. We'll call it our row page. And actually, you know what? I think I'll just do the row block. So it's already got a bunch of stuff on it and it's formatted. So I'll just delete this page. And here we go. All right, and then I'm going to go to data collections. I'm going to add a collection for items. And let's add a field for item name. And then let's add a couple of records here. So we'll just call it 1, 2, and 3. We're not going to do a bunch of stuff, but we'll add one more field for description. And what we can do, let's delete this. And we can delete the button. We don't need that. Actually, let's leave the button. Yeah, let's leave the button. We'll make the button be a question mark. And when we mouse enter into this, we're going to trigger that same thing, except for with the data that's local to this row. All right, let me go back in here. I need to put in the items, go to description 1. And then 2, and then 3. All right. So now we have some data. So now I'm going to delete this image because we're not going to actually use that anymore, just to kind of get rid of that. And then we'll put a grid. And the grid is going to show this new page, which I didn't rename. We'll call it row. So now we've got this displaying that, and we just need to tell it to get its data from the items, get all the fields, and we're not going to worry about filtering or anything like that. So that's going to run on page binding. So if I refresh this, I should get some data in there. All right, so now we have these 3 different rows here. So the next thing I want to do is on mouse enter or click of this, we can do either one. Set that root variable and run that root page flow that opens the container, that opens the tooltip and sets the position. So let's do that real quick. Ooh, wrong one. Here we go. All right, so we'll do a new flow. We'll call it show tooltip. And I'm going to set the variable. And actually, normally what I would do, since I already have this like plotted out over here, I would come over and go, let's just copy this set variable, come back to my other page and just paste it. And then we're just going to change it. So the tooltip value in this case, instead of coming from a static value where I typed in text, what I'm going to do is go from current record field value, because I'm inside of a record when I'm on there. You could also pull this from a local variable in the current page, or from an element on the page, or really from anything that you want. But I'll pull it from the current record field value of items, the description. So this is now going to take from that row, the description, set it into that variable. And then the last step is I want to run a flow on the root page. Sorry, we can just choose home because it's the same. And then open tooltip. Okay, so now it's going to set that variable and then run that flow when they click that button. So if I come back over here and I just click the button, and obviously we'd want to change this a little bit just because it's going off the edge, you know, but you get the idea here. So we might do something like, maybe fastest way is probably to put a section on here, or not a section, it's a container, right? I think the container is already styled with margin, and I believe, let's refresh real quick. Yeah, so now you can, right? There you go. And I probably need to bind those. I didn't bind this. So let's do that so we can just kind of see it looking good. Items, item name. One more refresh to get that page binding to run. So we got 1, 3, 2 because we didn't sort it at all. But description 1, description 3, description 2, right? So now I've got this using local context data to put the information inside of this tooltip. And we don't have anything setting to close that tooltip, right? So you might want to have something that hides that tooltip maybe on click of the background, or it could be on like mouse exit of the row. You could close it. It just depends on what you're trying to accomplish there and what the user experience you're trying to provide is. But in general, this conceptually should allow you to do pretty much any tooltip you want anywhere and make it completely dynamic and styled how you want, custom how you want to do it. We also use a similar setup inside of the studio for when you do things like if I right click on this and I go to copy it and we get this little element copied, it's doing the same thing. It sets these root variables and I have this container, but instead of moving the position to where my cursor is, we slide it down and then we have a timer after like 2 seconds, it slides it back up. And that's all that's doing. So it's that concept of like pass the root variable, run a flow on the root page that opens it and uses that variable. Exact same concept can get applied all over the place. And then there's one other method here. You don't have to make this totally dynamic. You don't have to use like a root thing. In this case, we could do this a little bit differently. I could do something like add a container here. And then we're going to put this inside of the container. And then I'll put another container inside of there. And this is going to be called tooltip outer. And this is like question mark outer or something. And in the question mark outer, what I need to do, I only need to do one thing. So I'm just going to do inline styling. And this is to make it position relative. And what that will do is whatever's inside of there, if you position something absolute inside of that container, it will now position that absolute relative to its parent container in this case, which is this question mark outer. So on the tooltip outer, I'm going to add a position absolute, and we're going to go top 100%, which makes it to where it'll always be at the bottom, so underneath the question mark, because it goes from the top 100% down and then starts this container for the tooltip outer. And then I'll probably do right 0. So now it's going to start from that bottom right corner. So when I open that container into it in just a moment, it's going to start from there. We might do something like have a little offset. It will do top 100% plus 5 pixels. And that's going to offset it 5 pixels down. So there's a little bit of space between them, but just totally up to the design style that you're going for there. So now let's change this to where on click, instead of the show tooltip doing what it was doing, maybe we can leave this one. So we'll say show tooltip root. Instead, I'm going to make another one called show tooltip. We'll call it local. And so one other thing to the element, I'm going to default this to being display none, so that it's just hidden by default. And then on click, we're going to show it and we're going to open that page into it. So we're going to still do some of the same things. So we're going to copy this. I'm going to still paste that in here so that we're going to get that same root value in order to use the data. Just that way I don't have to change this context. So one thing to note there is like, because of the context of this tooltip, I'm getting its data for the display from this root variable. So what that means is I can now reuse this tooltip all over my application. I just have to make sure that that variable in the root has a value in it that's appropriate prior to opening that page. When I open the page, it's going to show the right thing. So I can use it in these different tooltips on the root. I can also use it in these different tooltips local, as long as I'm setting that variable first, which in this case I'm doing. And then let's do an open page into container. We're going to open the tooltip page and we're going to open it into that tooltip outer. And then the last thing we're going to do is change the style property of that tooltip outer. We're going to change the display and I'll just set it to block. I could just leave it empty, which would just like clear it out, which will default it to block. I can type block in there. I could do display flex or whatever I want. Actually, I'll just leave it empty for now. And then the last thing I'll do is hide tooltip local. This, I'll copy that, paste it here, and go display none. Okay, so now we can trigger this hide anytime we want to. So there's a lot of different ways you could do that. One way, what I'll do is just on mouse leave, we're gonna hide the tooltip. So when they click the button, we'll show it. When they get their mouse outside of the context of that row, it's gonna automatically hide it. But you could trigger that anytime you want to. So now when I click this, it's gonna do that. And when I move out, right? And we got some z-index things we would want to run there. So let me show you how that works. So if you saw here, this is showing up underneath the question mark. And there's a property in CSS called z-index. So you've got the X and the Y axes, which are like up and down, left and right. The z-index is coming out into the screen. So it's like a three-dimensional direction to it. So z-index basically positions things on top of each other manually. And when you have things that are absolutely positioned like that, it's going to basically make it to where you have to sort of override it. The way that the browser is running this is we have row 1, row 2, row 3. And because it's going in that order, the things inside of this are automatically on top of the things from the row above it. And Dorian and Drew might be able to correct me. I can't remember if I just set this to z-index 1, I can't remember if it'll actually do it or if I have to do it in the context of the whole row. You remember?
It has to do with its like closest parent with a position, I think. So if nothing else is set with the z-index, z-index 1 would probably do it. Or you might have to set the actual whole row to be a higher z-index when you roll over it sometimes. So it depends on the situation. You just have to see what it does.
That's kind of what I was thinking is when you put your mouse over that one, we probably need to change the z-index of that one row to be above, right? And there are other ways.
I do that all the time, actually. It's a common scenario where you just have to like temporarily bring whatever row you're on up to the front and send it back later.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just part of the way that the web works, basically. It's how browsers render this stuff. There is another way we could do it too. We could just like add some more padding, you know, like make these rows taller to accommodate for it or move the position of that around. You can do it in a ton of different ways. Again, this all goes back to like, what do you want your user experience to be, right? So on Mouse Center, I'm just gonna make a new flow for, I'll just call it z-index is fine. And we're gonna go style, set style property of the grid row itself. And there's a property called z-index, and I'm just gonna change it to 1. The other ones will all be, by default, they're just 0. There is no z-index. So it should just, when you roll into it, it puts that one as 1. And then really, I guess we're gonna have to also remove it from the other ones, right? When we mouse leave.
Yeah.
So.
Did you try just putting it on the tooltip? I might've missed it.
I did not.
Because I mean, it's worth a shot because nothing else has a z-index. It's just as you build out an application and get more complex, more things do usually have z-index, so it doesn't always work, but this might just work for you.
Yeah, let's go with that. Let's see. So let me remove from here so that we're not setting it anywhere.
Yeah.
Let's just see. Oh yeah, that was it. So that's all I had to do there. So yeah, if we have some absolute positioning inside of here or somewhere else, and there's a bunch of different places where that can work too. Sometimes these things like the different display methods in CSS sort of like override each other in non-coherent ways or ways that seem non-coherent. And you have to come back in and sort of like accommodate for them. But in this case, that worked great. And note that when my mouse is inside of this, even though I'm outside of that row, it's not hiding it. And the reason is that this is a child of that row. So the browser interprets your mouse is still inside of that row when you're doing this, right? So as soon as I get out, it'll do it. Or if I go below, it'll do it. Or to the right of it and out, it'll do it, right? So those are kind of the two methods for tooltips. There's this one like over in the root, open it, position it. You can also position based on an element. So instead of basing it on the cursor position, you can actually get the position of the element that you went into, that you moused into, and do it relative to that. So there's a lot more depth to this too. Like it can pretty much accommodate any method that you're trying to do in terms of a tooltip. But that pretty much gets it. So we've got, if you're wanting to apply static content like button or text kind of thing here, or if you're wanting to apply dynamic content like we did here, where we're pulling it from the local information, that's going to automatically pull it from the data inside of that row. And one thing to note here too, when I modified that div and I added the class, it re-rendered that container, which is why these item names went away. So if you ever see that, the item name gets set from the data binding when the page ran. And because I modified the outer row around it, it literally re-rendered the whole row, but it just rendered it. It didn't actually like run all the bindings and the flows and all that stuff. It just re-rendered it. So if I want to see that data again, if I just refresh, now it'll have that data back in there. I think that's pretty much everything.